Hi everyone, Rob Ager here, back with some more thoughts about Blade Runner 2049, or more specifically, some ideas about what would have made a better plot for a Blade Runner sequel. Now, I posted a video a couple of weeks ago on this particular subject. It was just my thoughts on Blade Runner 2049, and obviously I slated the film, and lots of arguments in the comments section about that, which was all very amusing, to be honest. Some people thought I was just trolling, and no, I wasn't trolling. I really do think it's an awful film, and a lot of people I know who've seen it think it's awful. I know some people who liked it as well, but for the most part, from what I can see, most people don't like it, and the film has flopped as well, which kind of supports my position a little bit. But in that video, I think there were a few things that I put across that were misunderstood. I mentioned that the novel of Blade Runner, the original novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, had some great ideas that weren't used in the first film and could have been used in the second film. And some of the people in the comments section were assuming that I simply wanted a sequel that adopted those aspects of the novel and that I wouldn't accept anything else. It's not true at all. I've actually come up with three basic alternate storylines of my own of what I think would make a much better Blade Runner sequel. Obviously, these are not fully written scripts because I haven't got the time to sit around writing scripts that will never get made. But I've fleshed out, I spent about a day just sitting and brainstorming ideas, and I bashed out about maybe 8 or 10 pages on each idea of a basic story outline. And I just thought I'd put those things across in this video because I found the subject quite interesting, what would make a good Blade Runner sequel. And the ideas that I came up with, I quite like. One of them I particularly like more than the other two. And I'll put those across to you here, and maybe in the comments section you can mention ideas of your own that you think would make a better Blade Runner sequel. Or just one more little bit of clarity to give regarding my previous video on Blade Runner 2049. Yeah, whenever I slate a modern movie, whether it's Mad Max Fury Road, which I still think is a hell of a lot better than Blade Runner 2049, but nowhere near as good as the original Mad Max films. And don't bother posting arguments in the comments section. Go look up my videos on Mad Max Fury Road and comment there and argue there if you want to argue about that. But there are examples of modern movies that I really like. Dread from 2012. I thought that was a great movie, brilliant action movie, loved it. Watched it a few times and it gets better each time I watch it, unlike Fury Road, which got worse each time I watched it. Snowtown, a little Australian film, I think that was 2011 or 2012. That one I thought was a very, very powerful film. Dark as hell, and not the type of thing that you would want to show to people of a sensitive disposition, but I thought that was a very important film. Movies like The Wolf of Wall Street I really enjoyed as well. There are plenty of modern movies that I enjoy, so it's not just a case of, oh, he only likes old school movies from when he was growing up and he just hates modern movies because it's not his era. It's not like that at all. Another aspect that completely contradicts that idea is that I think modern video games knock the hell out of the video games that I grew up with. And I don't just mean that graphically, I mean that in terms of gameplay. I've given a lot of praise to GTA 5 and the Elder Scrolls games. For me, those games absolutely knocked the shit out of every game that I played when I was younger. So yeah, it's not just a case of, oh, he's older and he doesn't like modern films because he's older. No, that's complete rubbish. No, Blade Runner 2049 was crap, and I outlined a lot of my reasons for that in the previous video. But I also said in that video that I think I could write a better script than Blade Runner 2049 in a week, and I still stand by that. So what I've done instead, which I thought was more fun, was, as I say, I've come up with some basic plotline ideas for a sequel. I'm just going to throw them across to you very quickly. Obviously, they're not going to be mega detailed, but I think the basic outlines of these stories are much better than what we got in the Blade Runner 2049 film. So let me know what you think in the comments section below and suggest any alternate ideas of your own. Okay, so here goes. Alright, so the first idea I had is one that I haven't really been able to come up with a catchy title for, and for the time being I've just sort of used the title Blade Runners. Remember we had Alien and then Aliens? Well, I thought this one could be called Blade Runners because it involves several Blade Runner characters. And the basic sort of idea is that, well, I was looking at the original Blade Runner movie, and you know that ending with the mountain scenery, and a lot of people sort of criticised it and said, hold on, what's going on here? This visually mismatches the rest of the film. Seems like an overly happy ending. What's going on here? You know, you've got the city, which is all full of smog and pollution, and it looks like the world has gone to ruin. And then at the end of the movie, you get this lovely, gorgeous countryside. And that always didn't quite sit right with me either. It didn't bother me as much as it bothers a lot of people. But I was thinking, in terms of a sequel, could there be something that would deal with that issue? Not that I was specifically trying to look for a plot idea that would deal with that issue, but the plot idea that I had would need to deal with that issue. Okay, so the basic sort of idea that I came up with was that in this futuristic world, you've got everybody is sort of enclosed together in the cities like we saw in the first movie, and then outside the cities you've got an area which I came up with a name for called the Blight Lands, and that's the sort of areas which are have got all the radioactive ruin. You know, the plants don't grow so much. We got a little bit of that in Blade Runner 2049, but the version I'm thinking of wouldn't be quite like that. It'd be more like the sort of ruins of the old world, you know, crumbled buildings with, you know, the odd weeds sort of growing out of them and stuff like that. And then beyond that, you've got this area which is the really lush parts of the world, which, you know, you've still got the greenery, you've got basically these areas are not as ruined. And that area I decided to call the Dead Belt. And the idea is that the people in the cities don't know what exists in the Dead Belt. They think it's a completely dead land which you can't go into because you die from radioactivity, but they don't know that those lands are actually healthy lands with lots of growing crops and stuff, and those lands have been sort of closed off from the people in the cities to protect them. So, you know, you got a little bit of an environmental thing going on there, and you got huge walls that separate the Blight Lands from the so-called Dead Belt. Okay, now the basic, that's the sort of basic world scenario I was thinking about. So obviously you go into more detail than that, but that's the basics. And the idea that I had was that you pick up the story from Deckard and Rachel have disappeared, and the Blade Runner Gaff, who deliberately let Deckard go in the first movie, and his boss Bryant, they've been fired. Now, we can't get those actors in to play themselves again as they were in the original Blade Runner. They're all much older now, or I don't even know if those actors are still alive. So you have to get rid of those characters. So they've been fired. And basically a new chief of police has been brought in, and he's gathered together a small team of like 4 or 5 Blade Runners, and he's sent them on a mission out of the city to try and track down and kill Deckard and Rachel, primarily Rachel. And the basic sort of reasoning for that, Blade Runners don't normally go outside the city. They don't normally work together in teams. But the problem is that Rachel knows too much about the Tyrell Corporation. She's got too much insider information, and they want to track her down and kill her because the information that she's got can be given away. It could be given away to other corporations. It could be given away to gangs of rebels who live in the Blightlands. So they desperately want Rachel dead. And also on the public level, Deckard has been blamed for the death of Tyrell. You know, he's gone on the run with Rachel, and it's been announced publicly that Deckard and Rachel were both replicants, and that they teamed up together and killed Tyrell and then went on the run. So that's the official story that's been put out about Tyrell's death. So you get these 5 Blade Runners who are given this unusual mission, and obviously they don't really like it because they don't normally work together. They're normally lone wolves, so they have to deal with each other, and one of them has been given priority over the others, you know, it's a sort of leadership role. And so this group of Blade Runners, they go off into the Blightlands wilderness to hunt down Rachel and Deckard. And they don't necessarily all believe in the mission. They don't like going out into the Blightlands, they're not used to going out there, and they don't particularly like working with each other. So it's a very patchy team they've got put together. But off they go on their mission, and There's also some conflict in that most of them actually know Deckard, or they knew Deckard when he worked as a Blade Runner, and they had a lot of respect for him. And there's some conflict about whether the group actually believed that Deckard really was a replicant, or whether there's something else going on. So you get all those conflicts. So you get 5 characters with interpersonal dynamics of who's in charge, who's not, officially in charge, who's unofficially in charge. And which interpretation of their situation is going to take dominance in the group. So you get ongoing conflicts like that as they're trying to hunt down Deckard and Rachel. And along the way, they get attacked several times in the desert, in the Blightlands, I should say, by groups of people who I decided to call them Blightsiders. They're people who live out in the wastelands, and we did get a little bit of that in Blade Runner 2049. These sort of groups that live out in the old world outside of the city, and they run their own lives. So this group of Blade Runners would have to fight off those people in several attacks. So you get a little bit of action into the story as well. And of course, the Blade Runners wouldn't just be carrying a simple pistol like Deckard did in the first movie. Because they're off into the Blightlands, they'd be a lot more tooled up with special equipment, special sensors, that each of them would be able to track each other's position and that kind of thing. And as the mission goes on, and by the way, I think in terms of the end of the film, they never do find Deckard or Rachel. They never find them. For one thing, we can't even have those characters in the story because Harrison Ford is a lot older, and I don't even know what Rachel Young looks like now. So we can't have that, and I definitely wouldn't go for CGI versions of them. So these characters, they never do track down Deckard and Rachel, but instead, what their journey ends up being is an exploration of the dynamics between the city and the Blightlands and the Dead Belt. And by the end of the movie, those Blade Runners that are still alive, they discover that the Dead Belt isn't the Dead Belt, and it's actually a sort of protected area where the keeps the sort of ecosystem going, or it's an attempt to keep the ecosystem going. So I mean, that's sort of the rough outline. I've got a more detailed outline of this involving the conflicts between the characters. So that one's the first one. I just called it Blade Runners. I'll just leave it at that. That's the first idea. I think that would be a much, much better movie than we got in Blade Runner 2049. I think it'd be a more interesting story, much more scope for better characters and so on. And it's less of a repetition of the first movie. Okay, so let's go on with the second idea. Okay, this next idea I think would be pretty good because it would take the whole Blade Runner world off into a very different realm, and it would have some quite different visuals to the first movie. We had this thing in the original Blade Runner, and it sort of crosses over into the sequel as well, in which there was talk every now and then of the off-world, the humans and the replicants and space exploration, and all the dregs of society are left back on Earth and so on. And I thought it'd be really good if a Blade Runner sequel actually left Earth and went off into the off-world. And in fact, that would be the title of the movie. Just call the movie Off-World. Now, the basic idea I had in order to take that story forward, have some continuity from the first movie and venture out into this strange unknown that was only mentioned in the first movie, would be that Tyrell has been killed in the first movie, and then there's an investigation into how the replicants managed to get back to Earth, why they wanted to kill Tyrell, and whether they had any assistance from other replicants in their escape. And so an investigative team is sent from Earth off-world to try and track down everything that happened with the original replicants, with Roy and Pris and so on. And obviously those characters don't come back into it because they're dead. But the investigative team could just be like 2 or 3 people. They might be Blade Runners. They might be some other police unit. It doesn't matter who they are. And so they go off-world, and these 3 characters, so let's say it's 3 characters who are the investigating team. They go off-world, and they're not used to going off-world. you've got the same thing with like the previous idea I had about the Blightlands. This time, characters are going off into a sort of an unknown place they've not really been to much before. So they're leaving the crazy cities of Earth and they're going off to this off-world. Right, so the whole thing would be set on a huge space station, a sort of space travel hub, if you will. And I was thinking the design of this station could be basically a huge sort of city, an Earth-sized city in space, which is covered with a huge dome, and the inside of the dome displays a fake sky. So you get fake weather patterns, fake sunshine and stuff. Actually, come to think of it, there was a little bit of that idea was used in the movie WALL-E. I don't know if it was a Pixar movie or not. I think it was. You had people living under a sort of big dome, and the dome displayed fake weather and so on. Good little movie, by the way. A nice little animated movie with some interesting themes. So I was thinking something along those lines. So you got this sort of fake city with fake Earth atmosphere in space. And most of the interactions would take place in this space station. And so your investigative team are having to go around and explore this space station, interrogate people, humans and replicants, to find out how they escaped, what their motives were, and in particular, what sort of drove them to want to escape in the first place. And throughout all of this investigative process, we get a really good detailed exploration of the world of replicants and humans in space. And I was thinking a really good way that the Roy and Pris characters from the original movie, that how they got together, would be that you've actually got replicants who are prostitute characters who are given to military replicants as a reward for their service in war. And that's how Roy met Pris. She was given to him as a sort of a love slave, as a way of, sort of a means of getting the replicants to want to go and fight in battle. Because that would be a sort of key theme of the movie, is that you can't just create replicants and say, well, right, you're a slave, do as you're told, because they want to rebel. In order to get a slave to commit to doing their job, you have to give them false promises. You have to give them little rewards. So one of those rewards would be they each get their own slave lover. And that's what Pris was. That's how she met Roy. And I was also thinking the Zora character. It's mentioned in the first movie on her data screen, her profile screen at the start of the film, that she was a specialist in political assassination, and I think she'd been transferred from being in the same type of role that Pris had been in, which was a prostitute, and then she'd gone to political assassination. And that, I thought that could be used quite well. So she was a prostitute, and she was basically dished out to high-level humans who had a lot of influence, and she was there to assassinate ones who were a problem. And so during that process, she learned how to make human beings fall in love with her. And that would be another theme of the movie about it's impossible for human beings to have long-term sexual involvements with a replicant without getting too emotionally attached. And what Zora managed to do is she managed to acquire lots of information from her human partners, her masters, sexual masters. She managed to acquire lots of information from one of them who'd fell in love with her about what the real life of a replicant is. And the replicants didn't realise that they only have a 4-year lifespan. I think that's quite important. Why would a replicant want to allow themselves to be a slave for 4 years if they knew that they were going to die after 4 years? And so the idea is that the replicants are sort of lied to, that you have 4 years of service. They don't even think of themselves as slaves. You have 4 years working in the military or space exploration, mining, whatever it is. And after the 4 years, you then you get to retire to a better life. Of course, the better life doesn't exist, and the replicants just die. But Zora has discovered this through a human sexual partner who fell in love with her and didn't want her to die. So he told her the truth about what the real life of a replicant is. And then Zora went and told Pris, and Pris went and told Roy Batty, and then you get your sort of you get your rebellion among replicants going on right there. I haven't worked out a way in which the other replicant character from the first movie would be brought into that story. I've forgotten his name actually. Leon. Yeah, I haven't worked out how Leon would be brought into the story, but that wouldn't be too difficult to work out. So yeah, that's the sort of basic outline. You get an exploration of this replicant situation. And as the investigators are looking into it, they're finding out that there's all kinds of problems between humans and replicants. The division between who's a slave and who's not isn't so clear. Of course, we got a little bit of that in the first movie anyway. This film would go into that a little bit more. And they would be finding that there's actually a larger awareness among replicants about the truth of their own situation. The humans don't realise that now a lot of the replicants know that they've only got a 4-year lifespan, and they're planning a much bigger rebellion on this space station, of which Roy and his colleagues escaping was just the beginning of that rebellion. They were like a break-off group. And so you sort of, as the investigative team begin to discover this plot among replicants, and you could have a situation where there is a spy who was sent in to investigate replicants, a human pretending to be a replicant in order to get more information. That could be a good little subplot, could create some interesting dynamics, interesting character interactions and dialogue scenes. And so by the end of the movie, as the replicants discover that their plot to escape is being unravelled, they then rebel en masse on the space station. I almost said PlayStation there. Interesting little Freudian slip there. So they rebel on the space station, and basically the space station gets destroyed at the end of the film. You basically get replicants flipping out and conducting a load of terror attacks on the station, basically killing most of the people. And that would be the end of the movie. And whether the investigative team who went there and unravelled this plot in the first place, whether they survive or not, I haven't really thought about that. Okay, so that one would be called Off-World, and I think the potential for that film would be enormous. It would be visually so different to the first movie. It would go off into a very different setting, and it would tie back to the first movie by giving a lot of character background. It would explore the things that the first movie only hinted at. Like when you had Roy talking at the end of the movie about the things you've seen that I've seen that you wouldn't believe. Well, yeah, let's show that stuff in the new film. Okay, so Off-World, that was the second idea. Alright, so here's my third idea. And this one, I've just decided a great title would just be Replicant. That's just a good title for a movie. People would see that and they would know that it means a sequel to Blade Runner, because no other, the word replicant doesn't appear anywhere else in our literature. Okay, so the basic idea of this one would be set in the same city on Earth as the first movie. So you more or less get the same sort of visual style. But the progress of the story would be very, very different, and the themes would be very different. I mean, basically the sort of overarching theme of the first movie was that these replicants, they do have feelings. They're just like people. They're slaves. Empathy with replicants was the main sort of thematic thrust of the first movie. I was thinking, it's not worth really sort of repeating that too much, because with Blade Runner 2049, again they pushed empathy with replicants again, and it's like, yeah, we've already fucking had this in the first movie. We had it thoroughly done in the first movie. You're not going to do it better, and even if you could do it as good, what's the point in doing it a second time? Give us something new. Okay, so what I was thinking for this one was that after Tyrell died, this one would jump ahead a few years in time as well. After Tyrell died, it was identified that the emotional separation between replicants and humans was not a big enough gap. and it was discovered that, with investigations into Tyrell's death and the causes of it, it was found that the replicants had too many feelings. They had more empathy than they were supposed to have. I mean, the Voight-Kampff test in the first movie, which tests whether someone is a replicant, isn't a very reliable test, because a lot of replicants do have a lot more empathy than humans assume them to have. And so what's happened as a result of that is that a new breed of replicants have been created who are engineered so that they don't have emotional empathy, and that in turn makes them far less human, and thus makes it easier to contain them as slaves, because humans don't identify with them as much because they lack empathy. And also specifically, because they don't have empathy, they're unable to form into groups who fight back against humans. Each replicant is a completely selfish unit who doesn't care about other replicants, and therefore they can't team up and rebel. And so there's a downside of that, in that when replicants do flip out, they are far more vicious and psychotic than they were in the first movie. And again, this sort of goes back to the elements of the original novel that Blade Runner was based on, because in that novel, the replicants truly did lack empathy, and it was quite scary the way it was put across in some of those moments in the book. So I thought, why not bring that into the fold into a sequel? And so basically, the Blade Runners are now set with the task of having to hunt down these particularly vicious new replicants. They could be Nexus 8 or something like that, Nexus 9, Nexus 10, I don't know. Now, I thought a really interesting dynamic that could happen in that one is that there are still some Nexus 6 replicants, or maybe Nexus 7 replicants, who do have empathy. And those particular replicants have been given a slightly better life. Oh, by the way, sorry about the noise here if there's some rain outside. It's just started raining. I don't know if you can hear it on the camera or not. Sorry about that. So yeah, you get the... you've now got replicants who were sort of a similar make to Roy Batty and Pris and so on in the first movie. And after Tyrell's death, it was decided that those replicants did have feelings, and they should be treated a little bit better. So their status in society was elevated slightly. They're given slightly better lives and so on. And so when the new breed of replicants, who are completely unempathic, they will tear a person to pieces. They'll torture people. They're basically so psychotic, they're the equivalent of serial killers. And so when you hunt them down, it's a lot more dangerous than it was in the first movie. And one of the dynamics that I think would be really good in this new sequel idea that I thought of would be if the replicants who've had their status elevated because they're identified as having much more human traits than was previously acknowledged, those replicants, some of them are involved with the Blade Runner characters in hunting down the new breed of replicants. So you've got some Blade Runner characters, some of whom are actually human, and some of whom are replicant Blade Runners, like you had in Blade Runner 2049, and their job is to hunt down the new breed of replicants who are completely lacking in empathy and are utterly psychotic when they decide to go off the grid. And so you get sort of a philosophical dilemma for the halfway replicants about, do I really want to hunt down other replicants? Who do I identify with? Do I identify with the humans because they've given me slightly more rights than I had before? Or do I identify with the new breed of replicants who are truly slaves and truly have no status in society? So it creates a sort of existential dilemma for the halfway replicant characters. And I haven't quite worked out where that story would go to in the end of the film from there. Obviously, you could have a basic sort of thriller sort of scenario of cops hunting down the bad guy. That would be it's an old basic story outline for thrillers that works quite well. Movies like 48 Hours and things like that. So you could have that as the basic commercial outline of the story. And I was thinking that the key replicant character who was being chased, who was going around and murdering people in all horrible ways, that would sort of take it almost into a horror territory, a bit like the movie Seven. I'm not a big fan of the movie Seven, but the basic idea was okay. You'd have a similar sort of thing to that. So this would be a much more gruesome film than Blade Runner 1. I haven't really worked out the ending, but that was the third one, just called Replicant. Okay, so 3 basic ideas there for a Blade Runner sequel, and I think all 3 of those ideas could easily be better than what we got in Blade Runner 2049. I think they'd be thematically a lot more interesting. I think they'd be more dynamic. I think the characters could be a lot better than they were in the new movie. So let me know what you think. Again, the 3 titles are Off-World, that was the one set in space; Replicant, which was the sort of brutal one that I just described about a new breed of replicants with no empathy; and the other one, which was the one that I just called Blade Runners, which is where a team are sent out to chase down Rachel and Deckard in the Blightlands wilderness and so on, and they end up in conflict with each other and stuff. That's my 3 basic ideas. Let me know. There is one of those ideas which I prefer to the other 2. I'm not going to say what it is. So let me know which idea you think would be the best, or whether you've got any ideas that would enhance those storylines, or whether you've got any alternate storylines of your own. I'm interested to see what you folks can come up with that would be a better Blade Runner sequel. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Ager. Check out my other film analysis videos here on YouTube and on my website, collativelearning.com. Bye for now.